Or do we keep it like
It's
this?
fine. It's done. I should be in even less light. That's for sure. Hi, we're live.
Are we?
Yeah, we should be a little. Hold on.
Yeah. That's the opposite of
No, that's what we should do.
really?
Yes. Let's see. We're balanced now.
Okay. It's balancing the force.
Yeah.
Hi everyone.
Hi, everyone.
It's Matt and Nancy. Nancy's a little
It's half speed, Nancy, today.
she's at 0.5x.
It's just kind of like normal speed for everybody else, right? So,
I
or less. No, I'm slow,
keep telling yourself that.
and I am going to make a lot of beaver noises on this particular.
We saw a beaver documentary.
And there was sex
There was beaver sex. It was the funniest thing.
with accompanying noises. Many, like 10 minutes of noises.
I mean, I was kind of hoping it'd be like do 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 do, blink blink, blink blink.
Oh, man. What did Coco say at a certain
Coco's like,
point?
Daddy, are they playing romantic music?
Romantic would be one word. I kept thinking something like, in the old movies, like a train would go through to
Yeah.
symbolize what had just happened. Anyway, but you knew because you knew, but then like 2 shots later, there were 4 little baby beavers. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, they made a lot of noises. They were, how is it?
I can't do it right now.
Anyway, I'm going to be doing that for part of this podcast.
This one's called Beaver Noises.
That's right. Hi, everyone. We promised you last Tuesday that we'd be doing another See You Next Tuesday at noon, and I would just like to say we are in fact here.
That's right.
That's right. We're going to try to make this on the regular.
Fulfilling a promise. It's going to be hard next Tuesday, but we'll see what we can do.
Because
we're going to don't say that.
Yeah, I won't.
There's going to be a man bear.
He'll just be wandering around in the background. That's fine.
Scratching his beard. I don't know.
Did you know that tonight is the first night in 11 nights that someone hasn't been sleeping in this studio?
Really?
Yes, it's been. It's like, hi, welcome to Nancy's Airbnb. So we do it there. There'll be no here tonight, but I won't be here tonight either. So
yes.
In any case, yeah. But I think we'll do it next Tuesday.
So we were gathered here because it's Tuesday.
Yep.
And we're seeing you on the next Tuesday, but also because Nancy got mad again at the Willamette Week, which is the alternative weekly newspaper, if it's still weekly,
it is.
in Portland, Oregon.
That's right.
Those of you who are not from the area, you might pronounce it Willamette Week because you don't know how to pronounce the word Willamette, which is very
Willamette. Yeah, everybody that moves to Portland says the Willamette River.
Yeah,
I don't think I did that, but I did a lot of mistakes. Tigard.
Oh,
Tigard.
Yeah.
Anyway,
my dad went to Willamette University.
Did he?
Yes, he did. Just throwing that out there. But anyways, Nancy got very mad at an article there.
Well,
why?
Let's just say, okay, so when we're talking about getting mad at local, meaning local to Portland publications, I would say usually it's the Portland Mercury, which drives me up a tree.
Is that an actual publication or is that just an online thing?
No, it's a public, or it used to be. It's they're involved. They're owned by the same people as The Stranger in Seattle. So it's an alt weekly. It's very, very left. I actually have some active animus toward the Mercury for kind of nasty things they did to me, but okay. But also I just don't like their coverage. I don't get it. And OPB is not covering themselves in glory, though that's the public radio.
Oregon Public Broadcasting.
Yeah. But Willamette Week, which, they're pretty progressive, but they got some good people over there. I've written a lot for them. I have friends that are still there, but they ran a piece. It was sort of a companion piece to a piece they had, which was a big story about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. It was like kind of like a Portland is back, baby. But it was more like, is Portland back? And they did some interesting data. They were like trying to say, look, Portland still looks really good, but we're still kind of depressed in certain ways. I thought it was fair. That was a fair piece. I was recently in Portland. I did say, a lot of places look pretty good. But the problem for me, and I think for a lot of others in Portland, is that there's just erosion. It's like if you had your fabric and like there's little bits that are fraying, there are parts of the Portland fabric that are fraying in bad and disturbing ways, and they're not getting fixed. Okay, fine. That's your backstory. So on Sunday, the Willamette Week wrote a piece, sort of a companion to the We're Back piece, called "Portland Isn't a Dumpster Fire. It's watching the sunset together." And they had a picture of a Saturday night. I think it was taken Saturday night at this place. It's Chapman Elementary School. And Chapman Elementary, you gather there for 2 weekends over the year when the swifts, these birds come and they circle. They make these crazy like shapes and then they go down the chimney, right? I've been there. It's a thing. And they took that picture. So this like Portland's not a dumpster fire. It's watching the sunset together. And that same night, a woman was murdered there. Okay. Willamette Week goes to press the next day with that headline.
With a picture
With
that's
everything's
supposed to
nice.
illustrate how
Yeah,
it's actually all
it's
very
great.
nice
We're watching the
at a
sunset
murder
together.
scene.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, when the picture was taken that night, the murder happened at 11, and the sunset is at sunset, right? But what are you thinking? And I guess the writer also was like, from the outside, it looks like this is like an exact quote. From the outside, it looks like a dumpster fire, but I'm not on the outside. That's what she wrote. I'm not
Now, are you being unfair because, of course, that's not their fault that someone got murdered after they wrote the thing?
Now I'm not being unfair to her. She's welcome to write that. But Willamette Week published this on the 25th. So the next day. Yeah, sure, it was already written. But should you maybe I looked today again, I'm like, maybe they should have added something at the bottom like,
Whoops.
wow, or not even
Some
whoops.
light murdering over
Not
here.
even, but maybe just like, we went to press with this, not appreciating that that same night, 13 feet away, I was like, how far from a woman was murdered. And as it turns out, someone that I know that was in a piece I published, I think I don't know if it was for Reason or Paloma, about Portland, who he and his husband left, they were in the park that night and they heard the gunshots.
Oh,
So it's just, I find this sort of there's this sort of as I was tweeting, I'm gonna write something about this for Paloma. Like you know, there's rose-colored glasses, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be an optimist, right?
Portland is the Rose City.
It's the oh, dude, thank you. I didn't even think of that because
Ah.
I'm um, but at a certain point, you have to say it almost becomes propaganda. Even if you don't know that you're doing it. Yes, maybe it feels really terrific where you are, and I'm glad. I'm glad that you were happy watching the Swifts that night. I'm glad that my friend Jeannie lives in a nice area where she doesn't really see the crime. But we're on target to have more murders than we've ever had in a year. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about crime. It's like you have to look at both. And I just especially think it is attendant to a really good alt weekly. I like the Willamette Week, and maybe that's why I feel like I should be able to criticize them because they do really good work and they've got some really good journalists over there. And I think there's such a thing. You don't have to be a downer Debbie, and you don't have to be a cheerleader. But you have to balance it. And I just thought that headline the day after a murder there is just it's just bad.
There's some level of kind of, I might call it urban contrarianism, which is to say, there's been a widely remarked upon level increase in violent crime in certain places, including where we live, New York, and also in Portland, and
Yep.
definitely Minneapolis and some other places. And there's a tendency among people, whether they're journalists, some of them are criminal justice reformers, when we talk about San Francisco, and
Yep.
where you kind of want to dig in your heels and go against, the right wing narrative that's trying to scaremonger people, and it's fine to point out the excesses of this, and oftentimes propaganda that's coming from the other direction, from law enforcement, as they're trying to blame everything on fill in the blank mild reform that was done, which can happen sometimes. But especially in journalism, but also just like in normal conversation, it's not going to do your cause much good if you deny the nose that's in front of your face. And there's that element to it that you kind of detect over and over again. You should look at the actual stats. In some places, the stats are kind of a mix. Portland, not much of a mix. I couldn't believe I saw this piece in today in CNN about what's happened in Minneapolis since the police killing of George Floyd. Um, Minneapolis police force has decreased by about 38%.
Mhm.
The number of murders has doubled from
Mhm.
46 to 93. Response times for police have increased from about 11 minutes to 17 minutes. Oh boy, that's a bad set of outcomes. Minneapolis, you recall, is not just the site of George Floyd, but a lot they have a history of a lot of problems with police abuse in that community, accusations of racism, and it's about the only place, or one of the only places, where the phrase "defund the police" was more than a slogan from
Right.
LARPers. It was actually there was some defunding that went on in the police, and this is kind of what has happened in the wake. I'm not going to say it is the result of X policy. There's a whole bunch of complicated web of it, but you can't help but look at Minneapolis and say, "Wow, it's this is whatever's happening right now is not working," and it's worth being honest about that rather than like trying to say, "Well, it looks better than it actually is."
When I was in Minneapolis, I was there for the Derek Chauvin trial, and I wrote about this for Reason. I went around with a businessman who had worked downtown for a long time, and he's like, "I want to take you downtown to show you how incredibly depressed and emptied it was." It was actually terrifying. We went through this one mall, and it's true that malls have been dying, and it's true that downtowns have been dying. So we accept that. But this was, he's like, "Nancy, you would walk through here because they've got in Minneapolis, they've got all these like above ground walkways because it's so cold." He's like, "You would walk in here in the morning, there'd be thousands of people." There was no one there. We were the only people
And
there.
this remind us again when this
This
is
is
exactly.
during the Derek Chauvin trial, so
Got it.
2021.
Okay.
So and he also, so we saw that, and he'd also, during the riots, in Minneapolis, he'd gone out and taken some pretty incredible photos while it was happening. We've published some of them on Paloma. But he was kind of a more, I would say, centrist, maybe sort of conservative guy who lived just a little bit outside of town, but he had lived in this very Tony area in Minneapolis. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the area, but we drove around and they were like all the $1,000,000 mansions. It was like actually really sweet, really pretty area. And every window had a Black Lives Matter sign and everything. He's like, "Yeah." And I go to these parties and I see my friends and nobody really wants to talk about what's going on. The crime rate's going up. And it's always like, "Yeah, defund the police." And then they take me into the pantry and say, "Where can I buy a gun?" Because they don't feel safe. But they also do not feel safe, meaning kind of in terms of socially safe, to admit that they don't feel safe. So you're in this sort of double bind, right? That you're creating your activism, or even just the way you're voting, or you're wanting to be the good people. I mean, as I recall, the New York Times had a pretty amazing article about Minneapolis last year after they were defunding, and everyone's out there, yeah, yeah, and then people are like, no, maybe I don't know. Like you've put yourself in a situation where it is much more violent because you believe in these goals. But like you said, how is it working? I can put a parallel to Portland right now. Portland decriminalized drugs. And I think many of us are for the decriminalization of drugs. But you have to have the other component. It's like, okay, so now what do you do with all these people that are lying on the street overdosing that I saw? It's like, how do you just do one without the other? I'm not, when we were going to do this podcast, we're going to be talking about certain issues. And I was like, I don't want to just be the podcast where we're talking about the same things that we talk about and we're complaining and blah, blah. Look at all these terrible things. But these are in front of our faces. And it would be interesting to try to talk about like what we think the fixes for this might be. I mean, luckily we're not in charge of that, though we are in terms of how we address it, how we write about it.
I see that Yael has joined the chat saying that, sorry, defund is my bat signal. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and points out that New York defunded an entire academy class, she says.
What does that mean? Like the
The
whole
police
police,
academy or
so
something.
like the whole class? I mean, I wrote down some numbers, when you sent me the CNN article. So Portland, right now has 789 officers, 127 vacancies. In 2002, I just thought, let me go really back and look. They had 1,020 officers. The city was much smaller then too. Um, Minneapolis has 588 officers, 260 vacancies. Pre George Floyd, they had 890 officers. The Supreme Court last year no, or this year ordered them to hire more. The Supreme Court of Minnesota ordered Minneapolis to hire more officers. At the same time, you've got this push pull. You still have people saying, no, what was it? We're just going to have community based, public based things. It's like, they're working against themselves. I mean, you can pick a direction, and I think they tried to do that in Minneapolis. They put it to a vote. Should we get rid of the police altogether and just have it be public based? And it lost. People did not want that. Not overwhelmingly though. It was kind of close.
Yael says that it was a few thousand cops were supposed to start in June and didn't, so contributed to the huge personnel problem. So it's New York. Huge personnel problem means we only have like 900,000 cops instead of 910,000 cops. Yael, I'm kidding. No, living in LA, like part of what they're constantly doing is comparing the LAPD to the NYPD because the NYPD just has 3 times as many cops as anybody else because New York's a big city and it's a cop town too. But yeah, defunding is not 901, she says. Yeah, and Andrew also says at this point, the admission that the city, this is here, Portland, is really in serious trouble is too painful admission for a lot of Portlanders to make. That's part of it,
Of
and
course.
and this, either it's your own sense of personal admission about the place that you live in and love, and also like a reaction to them outsiders slagging us. Like
Yeah,
that's
they
how
don't
you.
like that. Portland does not
I
like that.
mean, nor does LA.
Yeah.
LA hates it when someone from the New York Times shows up and says LA actually sucks. They go crazy.
I would just also like to point out, I looked at some calls for service, how many calls for service they had in Portland last year. So Portland is 145 square miles. They had 229,000 calls for service. So you talk about bad policing, and yes, there's bad policing, and police do terrible things. But you're also talking about 229,000 calls came in for cops to show up. That's a lot of calls. Last year, it was 16-minute wait. So I'm on the ground bleeding. Someone has shot me or stabbed me. It's 8 minutes you got to wait in line on the phone and 7 minutes for the cops to get there. I mean, it's not great, but it's not trouble. Last summer, it was July, August. There were 39,000 calls. It took 53 minutes for an officer to get there. I mean, you're dead. I mean,
Sounds like an increase.
that's the CNN piece that you sent
Yeah.
me, that this guy, which is this is so heartbreaking. He gets shot by, like, some random dude while he's getting gas, and who does he call? He calls his mother, and she rushes down there with her son and his daughter, and they're, like, calling 911 frantically. He's dying. This 12-year-old's on the phone. "My uncle, he's dying, he's dying, he's dead, come." He was dead.
BU Vandals cheekily says counterpoint. Portland was never good. It's BU now. Come on, Portland's great.
I don't know. When I moved there in 2004, it definitely did not have this kind of rep. Now there was gang stuff for sure. I lived in a pretty active area. There was tons of crack being sold around the corner. There was violence. We heard gunshots a lot. Um, but it was very much insisted in little pockets of the city. Now, if you look at a map of Portland where the crime is, which I did this morning, it's out in the sort of far southeast, but it's also downtown. I mean, downtown it's scarred again. There's just these kind of rips in the fabric, and I think it's hard for Portlanders to admit that because when you really do believe that you're doing the right thing for your fellow man, it's hard when you see this in front of your face. It's like, well, maybe we just need to do it a little harder. We need to try a little harder. We need to be a little more permissive. We have to put fewer people in jail. We're not going to spend the whole episode talking about this, but I'm writing about a murder right now, which, it's hard to say, like, well, if X had happened, she wouldn't have been murdered. But I got to tell you, the system as it's set up in Portland right now did allow this woman to get murdered.
Let's bring it back to baseball, which is to say that uh, there is, if you look at that baseball stadiums construction, and I know that's what's been topmost on Nancy's mind for a
Well, the
while.
questions, everyone's asking this in the questions. So,
Which is that in ye olden times, baseball parks, think of Fenway Park or Wrigley Field, as 100-year-old parks basically, were built in the middle of the city, like right there in a city block. There's a neighborhood right across the street kind of thing. And then after World War II, a lot of these downtown parks fell into disrepair, and also the downtowns themselves fell into disrepair. And as the '60s went on, especially, there was a lot of riots in the cities, and there's just a big kind of change to that. And so the stadiums went suburban. They went to the outskirts of the town. The stadiums engaged in white flight, basically, from downtowns beginning with Camden Yards in the early 1990s in Baltimore. Stadiums came back into the city. They were seen falsely by proponents as engines of kind of economic developments and sort of re-urbanization. If nothing else, they at least announced to the world that you could go downtown again. And generally speaking, there was more kind of influx into previously shuttered downtowns, except in places where people, the population was just absolutely evacuating, like Cleveland and some other places. But in general, that was kind of the story. I think that there's a that I suspect that we are in the middle of a story, what with a pandemic, working from home, people moving around in schools, which I'll talk about in a second, where people are kind of leaving downtowns again. There's not really a reason to live in New York as much as there was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And that is going to change. I'm talking about beavers as were at the top of the show, beavers having sex. Um, uh,
Oregon State
it's
is
beavers terraform their world. I think our world is being terraformed away from cities right now, and um, I think that there's a people are who are exactly 1 day younger than me don't remember this, and we're kind of here to remind them. When the cities emptied out in the '60s, when people evacuated from school systems, who stopped believing in downtown, went to the suburbs, it was terrible for cities, and it was terrible for the people who were left behind. There's a series of stories I'm going to write about this at Reason probably for tomorrow. Education Week had a piece out at the end of August, um, talking about the amount of white flight. Now, I'm under the influence of Camille Foster, so I don't really try not to think in terms of broad, stupid racial categories because race is a fiction, man.
it's a construct.
However, it's a construct. However, it's a construct that people use, and they're measuring this stuff. And it reiterated what we've known for a while, which is that the bigger the city schools, the bigger the city and the bigger the school systems, the more that they were shut, the worse it was for everybody in educational outcomes, and the more they lost enrollment, right? This is sort of well known. The American Enterprise Institute had a big piece out in April or May talking about this and detailing this. The twist in the education week story, huge study nationwide, 27,000 systems or something like that, or cities, um, is that the racial breakdown is fascinating. Suburban schools, right? Not even, we already know that everyone left the city schools as they could. New York has lost more than 10% enrollment in 2 years. Think about that. They didn't come back after the enrollment. The first year of the pandemic was the biggest year on year loss of enrollment in United States public schools since 1943. And you can remember there's things going on in 1943 that might have had something to do with it. So it's basically it's a wartime kind of thing. Um, some of that enrollment came back, but it came back in places like Florida and Texas. What do they have in common? Well, their schools were open. They did not come back in the cities. The cities are absolutely hemorrhaging, but also the suburbs are seeing a flight of white students. So if they look at the student enrollment changes in suburban districts, 5% of the white population vanished. Um, uh, I think it's like 3% or 2% of the black population went down, 2% of Latino population, and just 1% of Asian. So an overall 3% decline. That's big. And what's interesting in these stories, not just the Education Week stories, but other just general enrollment going down, are the quotes from people on the inside. The quotes are like, "We've never seen anything like this." Uh, or we don't know what to do, this is a wake up call, all these kind of things. People did not set their calibrations, their ability to understand things at such a level where they were willing to see what was in front of their face. They are belatedly recognizing, because of the cruel math of enrollment, because it's tied to funding, that, oh my god, there seems to be some this there was a huge hit that happened here. There's a shift in the way that the entire country sees about education, and all the quotes from individual parents are like, "As soon as we could, we we got a different solution for our kid right now." So people who have the means, by any a definition of what that means might be, are skedaddling, and that's just going to have gigantic repercussions for the way that we organize cities and the way we conduct public policy in this country, and the inability or the reluctance to admit what is happening around you is now part of the problem in coping with what's happened since.
Well, when this all was happening, there was, of course, a culture war issue, and Randy Weingarten saying one thing, and the teachers unions, and what are you, a racist? I mean, all of this language now. This is sort of by necessity, the article you're talking about, it's in the rear view because you are now dealing with what it is. I found that article incredibly chilling. Some of the numbers, 283,000 white students have dropped out of the system since, I guess, last year, since 2020. That's a
And I think that's just in suburban schools.
okay, and then but only interestingly, only 10,000 Asians. That was interesting. There was a weird, like, the
Asians are the poorest group,
and
right? So it's like we're talking Chinese immigrants. Where are you going to go? You don't
yeah,
have
and
money.
also they're very, very, very devoted to education, right? So
Yeah.
they're gonna stay. They were saying that this, and this is very obvious, that the places where there were like no mask rules or loose mask rules were the quickest to rebound, and the places with the strictest mask rules are not have not rebounded. They have not rebounded, and they have to look at a completely new normal. And there was terror in some of these quotes. They're just like, we we don't we don't know how we're going to do this. And in terms of numbers, this is your department, but I was looking when you're talking. I mean, obviously, the amount of money you're getting from the states, and I don't know if it's the feds too, is tied to enrollment, right? If you have 4 students, you're gonna get X amount of dollars. If you have 400, you're gonna get Y. So in 2018, the entire this is federal and states, was $800 billion for schools.
Okay.
That's what it said. All right.
That sounds
In 2020, 776 billion. In 2022, 666 billion.
that doesn't count pandemic money probably.
No, it doesn't.
Federal,
It
which
doesn't.
was a
It doesn't.
gigantic bailout for a lot of these systems. Another thing to um, uh, keep in mind, and this is something that I experience very much in our own kids' school district. Our school district was a trailblazer in removing admissions screens for kids. So before, this is like kids going to middle school, kids going to high school. So before, schools would say, okay, we want to select people who, I don't know, show up. Who like before it was like an actual semi terror. You have to make sure that in your last year of elementary school, fifth grade, that you have pretty good attendance because these schools are going to be paying attention to who's showing up and they're going to use some kind of selectivity. Or it could just be, there's a performing arts middle school, so they're going to do a tryout, or they're going to be this, they're going to be that. They got rid of those screens in the name of racial equity in our district.
So you don't have to attend school. Like, let Joe lives here and he came 15 days. So we know.
They removed that as a screen, yes.
Well, I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
What happened, and so this was adopted as fate would have it, and I'm sure we've talked about this once or twice. This was adopted. Effect the first class that was affected was my daughter's class as she was entering middle school. Um, they and I wrote about it at the time. This is now 4 years ago, and a couple of longer pieces. It's really like pushed through, railroaded by activist groups. New York Appleseed is the one that I would probably have the most active contempt for, just because I've seen the way they do their business, regardless of whether I agree or disagree with them. And I do disagree with them, but they're jerks. But so they got rid of the screens, and then part of the idea was they worked backwards from this district, District 15, which encompasses Park Slope, which is very Tony, and my neighborhood, Carroll Gardens, which is kind of nice brownstone Brooklyn, and it also encompasses Sunset Park, which is immigrant striving neighborhood, half Chinese, half Latino, and so a lot of different people, and there's projects, pockets of that too. So there were 3 of the 15 middle schools that were considered to be, those are the schools that everybody wants and that are associated with privilege, right? Including one not far from our place called MS-51. That was the one that everybody wanted their kids to go to school. As fate would have it, Bill de Blasio, both of his kids went to that school.
Our former mayor.
Former mayor, Brad Lander, who was the relevant city councilman from that district, his kid or kids went to that school, and they pushed through this change, and they announced this change at MS-51 to say, we've benefited from privilege, but now we've learned the errors of our ways now that our kids are safely graduated,
Yeah.
and we've removed all screens for people to get in there. What's happened to the district and to that school since then? This affects the enrollment conversation. The first thing that happened, and I wrote about this at the time, was that for the first year in 10, enrollment declined. It didn't just decline, it declined by a lot. Something like 18% was the number of decline after going up
But
every single year because a huge number, a large increase of number of people didn't get the school that they wanted, didn't get any of the schools that they listed on their applications
Right.
of preferences because the new system, which is sort of called controlled choice. It's a lottery. They want to get people of certain. You can't keep in mind race for this, so they make uh, uh, income a proxy of race. So they wanted to have X percentage from more distressed family backgrounds to go in. And so we just saw an exodus. This is pre-pandemic exodus from our school district. Um, the good part was that all kinds of populations that never before had applied to or been accepted in MS 51 got in. The bad news, we have a friend who pulled his kid out of MS 51 after eighth grade, moved to a different state, and retook eighth grade because the quality of education was so crappy there. It had gone from being considered being like one of the most elite schools in not just Brooklyn but in New York City public system to, and we have and kids, exactly my 14-year-old daughter's age who went there, chaos, because this also came with an adoption of a policy called restorative justice, where you don't really punish kids who are acting up in class. You sit in a circle and try to work it out. I'm kind of it's reductive, but that's more or less what it's like. So in 3 4 years, you went from the student population just absolutely changing and the sense of discipline absolutely changing, and now it's chaos, people on the run, the PTA is all messed up too. So that is what happened, and they just voted, and I don't know the outcome of the vote, um, to see whether they're going to make this more system wide in the city of New York, seeing District 15 as the trailblazer. So yeah,
So every school then will be this way.
well, the thing is, Eric Adams came into office rejecting that. So the New York City is supposed to announce its, because they waived screens going into for admissions because of the pandemic for 1 or 2 years, and I think this year's they're coming up with their idea of whether they're going to reinstitute them or not. Eric Adams ran on reinstituting them, and he was not interested in these equity schemes. But everyone is awaiting the decision. But this absolutely affected that. So it's a it's something that we've noticed in the education debate. The pandemic made people realize how things were actually happening at schools, and one of the things that's happening at schools is that everywhere there is seen to be privilege or eliteness, activists are trying to break down everything that made it that way in the name of rebalancing sort of racial outcomes or racial participation in places like that. And that is hastening the flight away from schools, not just white flight, but just flight away from schools, which is a pattern that we've seen in all cities, San Francisco chiefly among them, who embraced these types of systems 10 years ago.
And then we know what happened in San Francisco. The people that were pushing the hardest, the what were they called? The not the school board members, they got voted out. And the one school where they that was the really, really popular school where there were screenings, they got rid of those screenings and the people went bananas. They're like, no, they've got the screenings back now.
Yeah, there were basically two main issues in San Francisco. One was pandemic, or three. One was just pandemic, everything was closed forever, and they
Right.
didn't care. They're very imperious
And they
about
just
it.
wouldn't open them. Like, no, parents are begging. They're begging. They're like, no, 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 we've got to solve all these racial inequities first, or whatever the things they were saying they
Two, they
wanted
were
to.
renaming the schools and getting rid of, these problematic names like, I don't know, Dianne Feinstein on a
Yeah,
school.
Abraham Lincoln. Yeah.
So that was ridiculous to do during that pandemic. But three, it was that they got rid of the screens in for the elite schools, and that's when the Asians went bonkers.
And don't mess with
Don't mess with
Asians
the
and their
Asians.
kids' schools, man. We're there. It was interesting. It's been an interesting story to stay on. I mean, I obviously don't know the fix, but it doesn't seem to me that throwing up the it's not just that they're like throwing up the cards in the air and letting them fall where they may. They're letting them fall in these like little ideas that they think are just. And it's not working. I mean, you have to have the courage and I'm sorry, the maturity to say, you know what? I thought that these ideas were interesting, and we were gonna try it even with our most precious commodity, which is our children, which is the future. But you know what? It's not working, and maybe my kids are really unhappy. Maybe there's chaos. Maybe I have the wherewithal to pull my kid out, and even though I'm gonna pretend I still really like those ideas, my kid's going to school over here. I really think I often think of the word juvenile when I talk about Portland sometimes. It's like you can't be an adolescent with these ideas that you think are going to work because they feel so good, or like we have a picture here on a dumpster fire. That was our little logo today. And it's like every time you know how many dumpsters I saw set on fire in Portland in 20 and 2021?
Actual dumpster
No,
fires, not
actual,
metaphorical.
no, not metaphorical. I was there, I mean, dozens of times when the activists were setting these dumpsters on fire. And I was like, is that your gambit for creating a better world? Is that it? Like, that's the move? Because I don't know, kids doesn't really seem to be doing it. And there just seems to be a parallel with doing this with the schools. It's like, we think these ideas are going to work. Well, again, you said earlier things like you have to see the nose in front of your face. And I think there is less shame in saying I was wrong and let's try to do a better job than sticking to your guns because you just think your guns, these are the right principles and we're going to fight for them. They're not. I mean, and we have evidence of that. I think we have evidence of a lot of these things that have been happening in cities over the past couple of years, and it is attendant on people to do a better job and admit that maybe their ideas were not the right ones.
I take weird heart, and this may seem like tangential, but I don't think it is. In regards to that kind of frame of mind, California a couple weeks back, very overwhelmingly voted to bring back nuclear power. Um, in the face of all kinds of
Crazy
energy
shortages. Yeah.
shortages and even the Russia-Ukraine war and a bunch of other things, but also in kind of belated recognition of something that a lot of environmentalists, a lot of libertarians, a lot of other type of people have been saying for a long time. It's like, hey, nukes are really good if you are serious about reducing the amount of carbon
Right.
that you put into the universe. And so the fact that that kind of magical thinking of we can just sort of do nuke-free renewables to replace all carbon-based fuels, at least that there was an ability to say, "Hey, maybe we were wrong about this. Circumstances have changed our mind." I look forward to other people applying that same kind of elasticity to look
Mhm.
at it because I suspect, and again, this is something to check out rather than just believe in your own suspicions. But I suspect we're seeing in certain places in the country a kind of governing dysfunction of cities not being run well. And we've run through this before. We're old enough to remember the 70s. The 70s made a lot of great art. Let's be honest about
Great
that.
movies.
Doesn't mean you wanted to live there. So like let's try to figure out like have policies so we can live there because New
We
York's
should
so great.
march into the future with better ideas. Why not?
All right.
Okay. Well,
Are we yep, 37.
we're out.
Perfect.
Guys, we will be I predict we're gonna be here next Tuesday at noon. So
Yeah.
thanks for sticking with us and we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.
You're on the button.
I'm on the button. All right. I'm going to end the stream. Go to palomamedia.com.
Yep.
Go to the nancyrommelmann.substack.org and also the name of the Smoke 'em If You Got 'em
Yeah, smoke 'em
podcast
if you
is
got
there.
'em. We got a good one up today.
And Fifth Column and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
fifth
whatever.
column. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Those
goodbye.
guys. Bye.